welcome to Zooms with a View, as I like to call it. Today, my special guest is Sutherland, the mega best-selling author of the Wings of Fire series and a bunch of other really cool stuff. And Tui, we go back a ways, and I think most people that know about all of this like incredible world that you've created have one question probably at the top of their mind, and that question would probably be, when was it that you first discovered that Mike Spradlin was awesome?
I think that is an excellent question. I can't believe it doesn't come up in every interview, really.
Right, right.
I mean, so long ago, like the moment I met you, I was like, probably even
Right.
before I met you, because I was working, in publishing. I was an editor. And I think before you even came into the office, or maybe like the first time someone handed me your manuscript, they were like, so Mike is amazing. And we all love him so much. Like everyone who knows him loves him. So like very much the minute I heard of you, basically.
That's a good answer. Good answer. Um, yeah, we our first connection, I guess, was you were my editor for Spy Goddess, and that was my very first novel, and a great experience. And my
It's so
only
much fun.
my only regret is I can't understand why that hasn't been turned into a graphic novel.
Oh my
Like,
God, that would be a perfect graphic novel.
hello, I know,
But who do
and
we want to? We should be
and
able to make this happen.
I know, but I mean, I'm sitting there thinking like kids are just reading graphic novels like there's no tomorrow, and I'm like,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah. We would love
and
it.
that I think it would be you can update it a little bit, kind of stuff like that. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I feel I still don't know why Steven Spielberg hasn't discovered the youngest Templar, but I digress. So, but now one thing I did notice on your website and in your social media that I got to ask you about how it came about, and that was this thing that you're doing for Marvel. Hello, like the Marvel. Oh my God. Wow.
I know. It was so excited. I was like, I don't think they just had any idea like how excited I would be, because
Oh
we
my
watch
God.
all the Marvel things in this house. Like I
Oh
am
yeah.
like a completist. I'm like,
Now,
universe, yes, please. And especially Spider-Man. Oh my God, Tales from the Spider-Verse, like the Into the Spider-Verse, like all the Miles Morales stuff is like genius. So yes, they asked me if I could write a Gwen Stacy story. And I was
wow. And
like,
you were
great.
like, I'm gonna have to think, okay. Yeah.
Exactly.
I'll need I'll need to get back. When do you want it?
Yeah, right. I'm here. I already wrote it. I got it in my
Right.
head like a
Right.
million years ago.
No, that's
So,
amazing. I that's on my bucket list, is to do something in the comics world before I kick off this mortal coil. But I was just like, wow, is Spider-Man going to be on a dragon? I mean, what's gonna, it was like, it's going to be awesome if, and if not, why not? Because
there's all the universes, right? Like, why couldn't they jump into the Dragon
well,
Universe?
he could go to the Forbidden Zone or the Forbidden Land or whatever. Sometimes I get my zones and my lands mixed up, but anyway, no,
There's no dragons. I have
yeah,
to admit, there's no dragons in this particular story.
no, right. So
Maybe one day.
what was it like working in that world? I mean, it's one of the things about writing that I find the most fun, I think, is the world building part of it. You get to create the rules, sort of.
Mhm.
And here you're working within the framework of a highly established, I don't want to say regulated world, but I'm sure that there were like Spider-Man can't do this and Spider-Man can't do that. And
Yep. And like you can
so
have this character, but not these characters. Like totally
right.
makes sense. Like they have so much
And
to keep track of, right?
right. And you can't make up new characters and the whole yard. So what was that? How,
Well, it was really fun because so I've done a few things where I've had to jump into someone else's world, like working on the Warriors books or the Seekers stories. I wrote like those Little House books. So I always want to do as much research as I can, especially when the research is, oh, go read all the Spider-Man comics. Oh, I was like, don't talk to me, children.
Research.
I'm
Right.
sorry, children. I have to read all these like Spider-Gwen comics right now.
Right.
No dinner for you. Um,
Right.
so that's what I did. It's really interesting. Like, there's a few different sort of like series with her in them, and then there's like all these crossovers that I had to figure out like how to get like the right order. But I read all of the things basically in the Marvel comics that have been written and with her like starring in them. There's actually a series by Shannon McGuire, who writes this like amazing book series called Wayward Children that I adore. So I was really excited to see that she'd written these as well, and they're wonderful. So funny. So getting inside the head of the character, but also like taking notes on the world around Gwen. So thinking about like, they have a different word for Google. They have Starbucks instead of Starbucks.
Right.
Making
Right.
sure I've got all those little things that I could like stuff into mine. And then you're right. They said don't make up any new characters. But as I was reading it, I was like, what about there's this one scene where Gwen rescues like this little girl from a car. And like the scene is long enough that they introduce each other and you get the little girl's name. And I was like, can I use her? Can I bring her back and like have her be a character? She already exists. And they were like, okay. So the book is
Right.
partly about, I mean, the story this is an anthology, so there's many stories in here.
Right. Right.
But yeah, so I was able to bring back that character and like continue their story a little bit.
Right. Well, the other part of that too is that you now have Comic-Con cred for the rest of your life. So you're set there.
Oh, I've only
But
been
it
once. I loved Comic-Con.
Oh, I know. I went there. I can't remember the first year I went, but I was like, my people. I found my people.
Right?
And just
Totally.
so awesome. Uh,
Same here.
but it's interesting talking about going into a world like that in an already established world. I with Rise of the Spider coming out, it's gotten me for some reason thinking a lot about setting. And I actually this time I went to Nuremberg and I went to the village of Harrodsburg where the book is set and spent time there, and it's just this incredibly beautiful place. I mean, it looks like I mean it's in Bavaria, and every time you turn around you think you're going to see Cinderella's castle, uh and in something like Wings of Fire, your world is not. I mean, you base it on a real place, I'm guessing, but it's not a real place, so you have a little leeway. But how did that? How, uh, this is my long-winded way of saying that when I was in Harrodsburg in particular, which I'm now obsessed with, um, I kept thinking to myself, here's this beautiful place, and so much evil
Yeah.
was fostered in this part of the world, and how it just seemed like such an odd. I was like, maybe if they had just stopped and taken a breath and looked around and say, oh wow, look at where we are, maybe we need to. And it kind of made me sad, and it made me, I'm like, how could you despoil such a such a gorgeous place with all of this, this hatred and stuff like that. So I just wondered,
No, can I just say I liked that you
yeah,
put that in your author's note because as I was reading the book, I was wondering like how whether this was a real place, and
yes, yeah.
that was
And
so
different for me because writing historical fiction, like most of the time, the places I write about aren't there anymore. I mean, so it's like I can't go there. And I mean, I could go to the middle of the ocean where the USS Indianapolis sank, but that's really not gonna, help me. Uh, but here it was still there, and it was preserved and rebuilt, and in the case of Nuremberg, built back basically the way it was. Um, and and it did have, I mean, I was so surprised at that. I was so surprised at the impact it made on the words. And I just wondered if that's something that you have ever felt before, or if you find that in your hierarchy of, plot and where setting falls in.
Yeah,
And I
I
know,
mean, I've been very lucky to travel a lot. So, like, my parents were big travelers, so they took us everywhere. My mom's from New Zealand, so there are settings in the books that are based on places I've been. I was um, there's the Waitomo Caves in New Zealand there's a scene in the first book where Clay is swimming out through these underground caves, and like that's what I was picturing. Um, but I think it's interesting talking about how research like changes your story. I always say it's sort of weird to say that I do research for my like dragon fantasy books, but for me, it's like studying the animals that I'm basing them on. Like I take characteristics from other animals and like the habitats that they live in to give to the dragons. So, for instance, like doing research on the arc that's like books 11 through 15. The dragons are based on insects. And so I watched some like insect documentaries, which were very creepy.
yeah,
And I was like, oh my God, there's so many cool, weird, creepy things that insects do to each other that I could give to the dragons to add this layer of like just menace to the hive wings in particular. Because like with the wasps that like brainwash ants to like do their bidding, or like the
right,
like lay their eggs in like living creatures. It's horrifying. So I didn't make it. I feel like actually my dragons are less creepy than actual insects, but there were
right.
definitely stuff that
I,
inspired me in there.
I,
Had you been to Germany before you wrote these, or
I
like?
had not. I had not. And I had been to France and to Dover, where a lot of the youngest Templar is set. But I had not done Germany before. And just well, like I said, I was unprepared for just how beautiful that part of the country is. And uh, it it I'm still thinking about it. I'm still thinking about why we see we always talk about I always think of it's sort of a analogous, but there's a Winston Churchill quote about how about architecture, and he says we shape our buildings, and then afterwards our buildings shape us. And I think about that with our like the environment that we're in. How much of that makes us um, who we are? Where we come from and what we come to believe and think and all of that. And or does it matter? Maybe it doesn't matter. I don't know. I'm busy navel gazing and trying to figure out these grand philosophical questions instead of doing my work. So
Boy, do I relate. But I mean, especially like it just feels so relevant to our current world, and like that. I mean, I think it's like an eternal question. Why do people do terrible things? Like, why are
right,
people evil to each other, and how does that,
right,
especially on a giant societal level? I don't know. I think that. I mean, I think that's why. That's why we write books, is to like wrestle with these questions. And
right. It's interesting that we think about those things. The I asked I was talking with another author about this and the very same question, and he said that he thinks it's because of the when a situation existed in Germany at that time with 50% unemployment and people had no hope, just absolute desperation. It's very easy to look at someone who has something when you don't and think, well, they must have got it, they took it from me, or I don't have it because of them. I mean, just because you don't have any other hope of getting anything, really. And it's a sad thing that things descend to that level, but it is something that no, if you, I highly recommend if you're ever around Nuremberg and take the train to Haraldsburg and then just walk around. It's just this gorgeous little it looks like Hansel and Gretel meets, I don't know, uh Lonesome Dove. I don't know.
yeah, I've never
But
been to Germany. I'd be very curious about it. I mean, I think
yeah,
one of the things that I was similarly, I was trying, I mean, I cover everything in dragons to when I'm dealing with my big philosophical questions. But like books 11 through 15 were really me wrestling with like, what do you do when like not just like the people in charge, but like the people following the people in charge are sort of like being unusually evil or making terrible choices. And like how do you balance like wanting to be a person who like lives with empathy and is constantly like I understand and I want to help you and I like I see where you're coming from with like wait no you're doing a really evil thing and I actually need to stop you from doing that evil thing. So like my dragons have, you know, book 11
Right.
is a super empathetic dragon and then book 13 is the one who's like no I'm mad and I'm going to stop this like evil because we can't just understand them, like we have to stop
Right.
them. And so they're both
Right.
like wanted to kind of wrestle with both of them. Because I don't know. I don't know the
Right.
answer, and I think that's why it's interesting to write about it and try to like wrestle with it through the different characters.
Right. Yeah. It's an interesting question about where where our values come from and how do we how do how did Germany go from being, basically a constitutional republic into this dictatorship, basically at the flip of a switch almost.
Yeah.
And we sit there and we think that, like I said in the book, I said we think it can't happen, where anywhere, but it can and it has and it does. Um, but when you were first starting out and when you I mean like I know you've done all these different things like you said, Warriors and Little House and your own books and did you were you did you consider yourself a plotter or a pantser? uh I'm a I'm a total pantser. I mean, I'm
Yeah, me
just,
too.
okay, good. Because I people will ask me, on certain sometimes I've done some like freelance stuff and they'll say, I want you to create an outline. And I'm like,
Yes.
okay. Okay, well, some stuff happens and then and then more stuff happens.
Yeah,
Uh
I'm discovering this because we're working on hopefully a Wings of Fire TV show and TV like they do a lot of outlining first and I was like what if I just wrote it like here's the book is the outline, can I just like jump in and start like
and
practicing?
it constantly amazes me. I'm just like I'm of the type that I read an interview one time with author named James Elroy, writes these like noir fiction, crime fiction books. He said he does like a 500-page outline of every novel. And I was like, dude, just add verbs, man. You're you're done.
Yeah, how is it not the whole book? That's amazing.
I don't know. I mean, and I would be so compelled to follow if I had created something like that. I would have to follow it,
Yeah.
and then I would be constantly worried like, what if the outline's bad? Then I'm going to have a bad book. So I applaud your pantsiness for it makes me feel a little bit better about my method, which is really no method at all.
Yeah.
But it's interesting how one of the things that has always fascinated me about writing and talking to writers and meeting writers is how everybody does it so differently. I mean, there's like, and people swear by their method. This is how you have to do it. And
else I would
I,
do that. I'm like, my method, every new book, I'm like, why isn't anything working? Like,
right. And I go to schools and I talk to kids and I'm like, you don't forget your teachers. You don't have to follow rules. When you're writing, rules. There are no rules. It's chaos. It's anarchy. Just get the words down.
right? I'm
And
like, just write because
and
you said it. Just write what
yeah,
you want.
and it's interesting how everyone's approach is so different and and I when I first started out I remembered I was so uh unsure of myself that I would read somebody like I read Lawrence Block, another mystery writer. He would write the last chapter of his books first
What?
because he wanted to know how the mystery was going to end, and then he just worked backwards and I was like, wow, he's Lawrence Block, he's a grand master of the mystery writer. He's got, and so I tried that, and I was like, I had like 50 pages of poorly translated Bulgarian or something. I mean, by the time I was just like, I can't do this. I cannot do this. And it yeah. So I'm glad to know that we may need to start a club or something, that we
The no outline
yeah,
club.
yeah, right. Yeah, the first rule of the club is there are no rules. So and the second rule is to see the first rule. So um but
I actually, I think one of the, I mean, first of all, I can't imagine knowing that much. Like I like to be surprised as I write. I feel like if
right,
I know too much, then I'll telegraph it, and I want to be more surprised. Because I'm like, if I'm bored, then the reader's going to be bored. So
right,
I need to like figure it out as I go. But
right,
the analogy I like is actually, I think it's George R. R. Martin was one of the people I heard say this. He talked about like architects versus gardeners, and
right,
architects are the plotters who like plan it all out, but I feel more like a gardener. Like I don't feel like
right,
I'm just winging it, but I feel like I spend a lot of time on like what are the seeds, like where did they come from, where did I put them, like what's the ground like. I mean, I'm not a real gardener like in real life, so I'm like, all right, does any of this make sense? Like, I
right,
threw the seeds
right,
there and then I threw some seeds over there. That's how you garden. I'm like, but I like to think a lot about where like the history of the characters in the world. And so that when I start, I feel like I know them really well. And so whatever happens to them, I'm like, okay, this makes sense. Like this is how they would react. Um,
right,
so for me, it feels more like watching a movie from then on because I'm like, oh, I'm just like following this along until I get stuck. And then I have to like
right,
backtrack. Where did it all
right.
go wrong?
Yeah, no, it's very interesting to me, the different approach that people take. And I I spend an inordinate amount of time thinking about process and craft and things like that. And then and usually to the detriment of my deadlines. It's like, because I'm thinking about how I need to do this right now. So, but don't worry because I'm thinking about it.
This is work, kids. I'm staring at my
I'm
computer.
all
Like,
right. I'm writing in my head. So,
I'm planning how to write.
right,
The
right.
plan.
Coming up
Um,
with a plan. Coming up with a plan.
do you
So,
have for the Web of the Spider? Like I know you said I think 6 books, right?
it's
And
going
so
to be 6 books. And it's interesting. Ideas morph and change, and you get, I talked with John Anderson, whom I think at
yeah.
Simon and Schuster. It's a friend of mine, and my original idea was there was a group of kids in Germany during World War II called the Edelweiss Pirates, and they were like a monkey wrench espionage anti-Nazi group of kids that they did anti-Nazi propaganda, and they let the air out of supply truck convoy tires, and they did all of this type of stuff. And the reason that it appealed to me is because we tend to think that in Nazi Germany, I guess perhaps because it's the most recent example, but that everybody was in favor of Hitler and that everyone supported the regime, and that's just not true. We read a lot. One of my favorite things is when the Germans annexed Austria. They said that Austrians voted, and 90% of the Austrians voted to come back to be annexed by Germany. And I'm like, 90%?
Uh,
90% of people don't ever agree on anything. So maybe if you have a gun to their head, they're going, you know. Um, and so there was always this that little kernel of, I guess, rebellion or whatever. And but then we got interested in how did this happen? How was this completely, in many ways, unremarkable person, Adolf Hitler, able to accomplish what he accomplished in a relatively short period of time? And yet, through the eyes of these kids who don't like it and don't like what they see and don't want their country to become that, but yet they don't have any power. They can't vote, they can't fight, they can't, but they can do other things. And so I sort of looked at it, and then so I said, well, we go back to to the 1930s, that takes out the Edelweiss Pirates. But I said, maybe these are like the precursors to the Edelweiss Pirates. Maybe these were the spiritual founders of that movement, that they were not going to stand for injustice or because, as I think, in writing for kids is that you tend to feel things like a person that age feels things very deeply, like what's right and what's wrong, and this is wrong, and it's very wrong, and we have to do something, and so that's kind of what the tack will take, and there'll be 6 books, 6 different protagonists, all of them will, be like the web of the spider. They'll come and go and be back and forth. I'm trying to figure out a way to keep Ansel in the whole series because he's like my favorite. He's my favorite
I
character.
can see that. I get, yeah, I do.
Yeah. But he's going to be like 16 by the time it's over with, so he may be a little. But anyway, so yeah, that's the plan, and it so far, so good. And I appreciate your kind words. And but I wanted to circle back to something you just said about TV show. So explain, please. Uh,
Well, it's like a long, complicated process. Who knew making TV shows was so hard?
no
But
kidding.
yeah, it's yeah, so we optioned the rights a long time ago, and then it was like in progress, and we had an amazing team working on it, and like incredible scripts and beautiful art, and then Netflix canceled it. So we had to start over, and we've been optioned now at Amazon
Oh,
Prime,
wow.
which and I have like the sweetest, loveliest producer. He's so great. And hopefully we think we have a showrunner. So maybe by September when this comes out,
Wow.
maybe we'll have announced it. But yeah, so then we have to build up the whole team again and kind of start over. But it's just, yeah, it is fascinating to see like how many people are involved. With writing a book, it's like
Kidding.
here I'm in my office with my puppies.
Yeah,
Like,
right.
you know, I can do whatever I want. With a TV show, it's just like a
And
exciting.
are we talking animation? I'm assuming.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, well, and then animation. It's even, the number of artists that
Yes.
go into doing one little frame of, it's just it's amazing to me. It is a wonder how when you start thinking about it that way, you are sort of at least I am amazed that anything gets done because
Exactly.
it's so complicated and it's so
Exactly. And that there's so much good TV in the world. Like how
right.
how did this
Right.
happen?
Exactly. Yeah, and it's just like, how do they put all of that together and make it with all these hundreds of people and crew and locations and all of that stuff and it's pretty amazing to me that but not so amazing that let's get cracking on good old Michael P. Spradlin's war here, Hollywood. But it's funny, I way back, gosh, I can't remember. It was like 2008, I want to say, when there was a writer's strike, and this writer's strike happened, and so all the production shut down. And I started getting like email after email after email from studios and producers, and that were all shut down. So they were going through their bookshelves, that they had, oh yeah, this is interesting, and they put it on the shelf and they don't think about it again because they're working on Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, and then when everything stops, they start going through oh yeah, this is cool. I want to let me talk to the writer. And I had people wanting me to do treatments and all this kind of stuff. And I did a lot. I wrote a lot of stuff back then that went nowhere. And luckily, I learned my lesson this writer strike because the same thing happened with, so I'm like, well, hey, what do you feel about a Killer Species Nickelodeon show? And I'm like, great. Would you like to write a treatment? No. Get back to me when you've got more, something a little more firm. Uh, but yeah, I finally reached the point in my life where I don't have to write for free anymore. So, it's like that was a big thing for me. So,
Yeah.
um,
It's
you
amazing
know,
how often that happens. Like
yeah, it's
I
like,
know Hollywood, I'm
well,
like,
yeah, and it is, and people that don't understand the process, it's like, well, just write a 10,000 page, you know,
Yeah.
treatment for a screenplay or for a TV show. And I'm like, no, I'm not doing that. That's work, dude.
Yeah.
And you know, I had a friend of mine the same thing. He's had stuff optioned and optioned and optioned, and he gets the same thing. Like, would you write a treatment? And he'd say how much, and they'd be like, how much? You mean like how long should it be? How big should it? He said, no. How much are you going to pay me to write your treatment? And they're like, well, we weren't. And you go, okay, well, talk to you later, because it's just
Yeah.
they it is a weird place. It's a weird vibe. And I was on one story about that whole world, and then I promise I will let you go eventually. Um, I was on a panel. I moderated a panel at Comic Con a couple of years ago, and George R. R. Martin was on it.
Oh,
And
wow.
I had volunteered with the woman who runs the panels there because she had me on panels for like 3 years in a row. And I said, "Look, you know, you've been kind to me and great to me. I'll." She had trouble getting moderators, and I said, "I'll
Hmm.
moderate a panel next year. I don't need to be like on it. I can do the moderation." So she puts me on the panel of geniuses with like Max Brooks and Kevin J. Anderson and George R. R. Martin and all these like heavyweight Christopher Paglioni, the Aragon guy. I mean, I'm like, oh, but anyway, I was at the podium and I was having them go down the line and introduce themselves, and George R. R. Martin was right next to me. He was the last one. And when it got to the guy next to him, I just skipped over him completely and went right into the thing. Like, okay, we're gonna go ahead and get started and talk about, and the crowd at first they think you're serious, so it starts to titter, like and then I'm like looking up, like, what, and then they're like, and like, oh my god. And he cracked up. He thought it was, it was, thank God. He thought it was hilarious. And later that next day, I was at this luncheon party thing for this